Well, hello. Welcome back to our podcast on intercultural competence through virtual exchange as a tool in achieving the SDGs. Today, we're going to really focus in on some very thorough research that was done on the intercultural learning about sustainability and the role of environmental worldviews and how those environmental worldviews help shape the intercultural interactions between our students when conducting a virtual exchange. I have some really outstanding researchers here representing several different countries. So I'd like each one to please introduce themselves, the university, and the division that they work in from the university. Dr. Fowler, would you please go first?
Hello, greetings. My name is Dr. Henry Fowler. I am the Associate Math Professor at Navajo Technical University in Crown Point, New Mexico. And we are a tribal college.
Dr. Khalil?
Hello, my name is Karima Khalil. I'm professor at Qadi Iyad University in Morocco in School of Technology of Essaouira.
Okay, Danielle.
Hi, everyone. My name is Danielle Nikaf. I'm an alumnus of DePaul University School of Public Service. Thank you.
And from Nigeria, right, Danielle?
Yes, I'm also from Nigeria. Thank you.
And Amana?
Hi, so my name is Amna Hassan, and I'm also an alumna of DePaul University, and I'm actually from Pakistan.
Okay. Well, thank you all for coming together on this podcast. The research that we've done, it really has yielded some significant and interesting results. And I want to begin with what survey instrument was used in this research, namely what's called the NEP commonly, the New Ecological Paradigm. Henry, could you talk a little bit about that new ecological paradigm?
The new ecological paradigm, the NEP, is a 15-question developed in 1970s. It's to bring forth about worldview, particularly about understanding about your worldview, where you come from, the region that you're associated with. And we employed that for this particular research, is to analyze the attitude as well as also the view about individual students, how they perceive themselves and understanding who they are in relationship to the environment. And it's to respond. It's a tool that's also used to often use to study the environment portion about who you are as an individual, relationship to understanding your background, about where you come from, the lens to look at the worldviews. Thank you.
That's really interesting. And so we actually gathered from March 2020 to December 23, surveying all of our students that were involved with global learning through virtual exchange among our schools as well as several others, using the NEP with a sample of about 889 students, both from the global north, about 65% from the global north universities, and 35% from the global south. So this survey, we of course had an IRB, and this 15-question survey, as well as some additional surveys on questions on ideology and social demographics, were asked of all of our students. And so the results, I think, were very illuminating. A couple things that we evaluated was the cultural variable from Hofstede. Is there a difference between these cultures in terms of collective versus individualistic? We also measured ideology on a scale from 0 to 10. And we also measured then the 15 questions. And we found some interesting things. We found that several of the students from different countries were actually had a bigger similarity than other countries' pairings. And we also found some very large differences. Let me explain. When we looked at the questions from the NEP, what we found was that the country of Brazil and Navajo were actually more similar than any of the other countries that were paired in our survey. Now, before we go any further, Henry, I would like you to talk a little bit about why you think the Navajo students and the Brazil students were more similar than perhaps Greece or the US or France or the other countries that were in the sample. Why Navajo and Brazil were the most common?
Well, one of the hypothesis, or maybe the conclusion from the results from the mean that shown that there is a close correlation between Navajo Nation and the Brazil students, maybe that they are facing an environment impact where the region is. Maybe there are some environmental commonality in relationship to impacting their health, their wellness, and also relationship to issues with climate change. Just like here on Navajo Nation, we have a uranium at one point. This was devastating for our people and continue to be impacting Navajo families. And there were many uranium mines that existed on Navajo land, and these mines are still open. So there is a relationship with the students regards to that impact of the history, as well as maybe in Brazil, they have a commonality with climate change, about rainforests, and they see how it's impacting their situation in relationship to climate change. So that is something that we can maybe research more between the two countries, between the two population, the students.
And Karima, when we looked at comparing the dyads of countries that were involved in the sample, the Navajo Nation and Morocco actually were the most different environmental worldviews when we used the NEP scale. Can you add some more explanation on why you think this may be?
Yeah, Kelly, nice question. In this research, the major finding on global learning in this research showed that culture played a role in understanding the environmental worldview of different nations. And countries participating in this global learning experience had different culture scores and had different new ecological paradigm scores. But culture only moderately explained these differences. And in our case, in Morocco, with my students, I can add the language too. Um, Sometimes the understanding of question in the survey can be different between students. So it can influence their response to the survey.
Mm.
That's
Mhm.
what can I say about this most difference between Moroccan students and Navajo Nation students.
Mhm. Yeah, and what was really interesting in the results, going back to the traditional Hofstede individualist versus collectiveness, is we did see that this added to some understanding. It was a statistical significant, you know, result in terms of understanding the NEP scores, but it was not a strong explanation. And in fact, the NEP was a better predictor of understanding environmental worldviews than just simply relying on the Hofstede. Now, I want to move a little bit to ideology, because we did look at ideology and we did use a self-identified scale from 1 to 10, with 10 being the most progressive and, of course, 0 being the least progressive of ideology. And what was really interesting was that we found that ideology was a statistically significant factor that correlated to environmental worldviews, but also a weak predictor in understanding or predicting a particular student's environmental worldview. But we went a little farther and disaggregated that data, and we looked at the correlations between the questions that dealt with humans are severely abusing the environment, and if things continued on their present course, would we have a major ecological catastrophe? So these questions were both reflecting of eco-crisis, and there was um, an identification of ideology that was not linked to the NEP on these questions. So I think that was really interesting. But for ideology, liberal ideology and environmental worldview had a moderate correlation between the two. And so students were asked about human ingenuity. Could we make the planet more livable? Or is there human exceptionalism in understanding the environmental worldview and the limits to growth? And these were also weakly, but statistically significantly related to ideology. So before we go any further, I'd like to ask our alumni, Danielle, can you think about how ideology and collectiveness versus individualist culture and environmental worldviews relate in your experiences in Nigeria?
Thank you, Dr. Zumis. Being an international student from Nigeria, I think I've had the opportunity to look at our relation to the environment from both perspectives. So when I lived in Nigeria very recently, I noticed that, for one thing, Nigeria is a very collectivist culture. Pardon me. I apologize. A fire truck just went by. But
Okay, start your sentence from the beginning, because it was very, very good.
Okay, thank you very much. I noticed that when I lived in Nigeria, Nigeria is a very collectivist culture, and there is a strong sense of duty, especially to family and to the community that you come from. I think a lot of that also has to tie into certain regions and tribes. But I will say overall, there's a strong collectivist culture in the country. When that relates to the environment, though, I think it's tends to differ just slightly. So in Nigeria, for instance, in farming communities, it seems like there's more emphasis on keeping so I think there's a strong emphasis on keeping the environment safe and the environment viable for the purpose of farming. But for instance, if you come to an urban area, it's not necessarily as well kept because people see that as a different, they see that specific environment as something that they don't necessarily have a duty or responsibility to. So in that case, they would say, oh, that's more of the government's initiative to take care of the environment in that way. But as it relates to their personal property, say they had land somewhere else or they were a farmer, they would take very good care of that land. I hope that provides a good background.
Very much so. It gives more contextual insight to our results. Amana, talk about Pakistan. Same question. How would you relate the results that we got on the NEP and culture versus the collectiveness versus individualistic and ideology?
Thank you, Dr. Zumis. So I would pretty much agree with Danielle. So like Nigeria, Pakistan is also a country with a very collectivist culture. People are generally helpful towards each other. And it kind of seems natural that you'd think that if a group of people who come together to help each other, they're like, taking care of each other. There's like a sense of community throughout the country. And you'd think that perspective or that culture would exceed for the world at large or like for their own future generations. But I believe that it is because Global South has its own challenges with like, poverty and overpopulation and other issues that it kind of becomes secondary to think about the environment of the world at large, or even think about like people would think about their immediate future generations, like maybe their kids or their grandkids' future, but they wouldn't think like how they're leaving the planet for the next 10 generations. So I believe that maybe it's because of that, for the lack of better word, like the realization about the consequences of their actions, which have been like contributing factor to their environmental views, or like not the most affirmative responses for environmental conservation and preservation. So I believe that the culture, even though it's collectivist, maybe that is also why it's reflected in the results as well, that it's not a very strong predictor, that you cannot really say that if a country or a nation or a group of people are collectivist, they might have like more favorable environmental views. And I feel like the ideology is therefore a much more, like, in fact, like it's better than the than in terms of culture, that you can predict that most progressive people would think about the future, the environment in general. And that's kind of reflected in the Pakistani demographic as well, that the people who are more educated, more they have more exposure, they have had like more diverse experiences, and they are generally more progressive, they tend to be more environmentally conscious than the people who have had a limited exposure. So I think it kind of like confirms the perspective of Pakistan as well. I hope that kind of gives a perspective about the collective perspective of Pakistan on the environment as well.
Yes, that was excellent. I think both of those examples help really apply our results and contextually better understand them. So just kind of to wrap up, the results section of our discussion, the conclusions really, what we found from this research confirmed that yes, there is an understanding of culture in terms of the collectivism and individualism, as well as ideology. They were all significant factors that correlated with the environmental worldviews. And while they were significant, they were weak to moderate. What we found really, if we're going to talk about worldviews and building learning experiences for students, as well as preparing them for the workplace, what yielded a better understanding is when we examine those similarity and differences across the NEP questions using the different dyad groups of countries. That's where we actually really got to see where we needed to perhaps target better building of intercultural skills and competencies in the future so that our learners could be prepared for working on global teams regarding the SDGs. The last thing I wanted to ask is, as part of the process, we did this for several years and we had a large range of countries represented in our sample. Dr. Karima, you've been working in virtual exchange for a very long time. How did you find our process? What did you observe that your students took away from being involved with a virtual exchange?
Thank you for the question, Kelly. Yes, I use virtual exchange in my class since many years, and I continue to use it each year despite the constraints of technology and the time difference between countries. One of the most reason is when I see the smile and motivation of my students after the virtual exchange, especially students who were very discreet or they had very little social interaction. Sure, the global learning experience by virtual exchange help mental health and well-being of students. And I see this difference before and after this type of global learning experience. Now, about the NEP, this is the new ecological paradigm. This is best technique to introduce our student to understand sustainability, environment protection, and also to discuss about this thematic between students from different countries and to know their opinion. One last thing about this, in my opinion, the interests in virtual exchange and global learning for my students is that in my case of Morocco as developed countries, where we do not have much financial support to travel students abroad. So this collaborative international pedagogy, in my opinion, is a good opportunity and alternative to traditional study abroad. And students can experience with different culture and they can engage in intercultural learning by collaborating on an online project, for example, with their peers. And this is also related to sustainable development goals, like Goal 4 for equality and inclusion in education, and also Goal 13 related to climate change, because we reduce the carbon footprint due to international travels. So that's what I can say about the interest in virtual exchange and global learning for higher education.
Those are really good points that I think we have to keep in the forefront of our minds regarding the inclusion of all nations and all learners. And that may mean, not all of us have the ability to travel or to interrupt our course schedule or our life work balance. And also the carbon footprint of travel is very high. And so I think those are really good points that you make. Henry, some observations, I think, from the Navajo students. How did they respond to being involved with the virtual exchange and talking with our students about the NEP?
The whole process for my students was a new experience for them. They had to adjust to many different changes. One change is the time differences. So I think that was something new that even myself had to adjust and to adapt to communicate with students abroad, across to different countries, and then as well as also similar to Morocco students. My students were from a very rural area of the indigenous community, and we are the largest Native American tribe in the United States. But we are strict to limited resources, and the virtual exchange provided beyond what they see with their own environment as students. One is that they experience poverty, and they're able to communicate what they think their worldview is by seeing similar problems, issues, challenges that they see in different countries, so they can relate to students' perspective, their level. And I saw the joy from my students learning different about world impact that they're also challenged with here on Navajo land, Navajo Nation. And we employed the COIL method, collaborative online international learning approach. And our students came from different backgrounds, from engineering, architecture, biology, legal studies. And for my students, they were from Diné studies. So learning about their language, learning about their culture, who they are as indigenous. And we live on a trust land. And I think that really plays a huge role in ideology, how they view their environment. A trust land is just like a lease that you're leasing from the government, from the United States government. So it's not our own land. If you go outside, you're able to sell your land. But if you are on trust land, the government, the land is leasing to you. So that restricts a lot of bureaucracy, a lot of red tape to make the transformation change, to improve economy. And I think that's why our students from Navajo land, the poverty is really the issue and the problems, and the alcoholism that they see, and the loss of the language, because they come from more the dominant Western ideology is shaping who Navajo people are now. And I think that's all the perspective of the environment. But we are a holistic thinker, and that we are more based on peace and harmony. And Navajo we reference as Hojo, beauty, and that value, that belief that the students still value some in them. So they try to walk between the two, the dominant way of living, as well as their cultural background as Navajo students. And they get to share all of that knowledge, who they are as indigenous, with the world peers that they develop through this research. So it is a great opportunity for our students to share their challenges and who they represent, who they are, and tell the story about themselves. And I think it's strengthening who they are as Indigenous people, and they're very proud to tell about their culture and their heritage.
That was really, I think, an important addition to what we're talking about, such as the trust lands and that worldview lens that the Navajo students have that bring into the virtual exchange. As we close, one anecdote that always sticks with me is, Henry, I don't know if you remember, we started our virtual exchange right when COVID was really, really peaking, impacting both the US and the Navajo lands. And I remember us talking about maybe we should cancel, maybe it's too much of a burden to put on the students. Remember this, Henry? This conversation we had? And I thought about it overnight. You proposed maybe postponing our virtual exchange because of the burdens of COVID. And I thought about it overnight. And then remember, I responded to you and I said, I don't want to take another opportunity away from our students. Let's try, but let's be flexible, even more flexible, but let's try. And then in the end, our students during that period gave us the feedback that this was some of the only peer-to-peer communication that they had because everybody was at home, and how much they appreciated, even though it was a struggle with technology at times and Wi-Fi at times, but that they so appreciated having the opportunity to meet students between our two schools and actually cooperate and work on things together. And the feedback was amazing from that class. And it was a struggle. Our students had to be patient with each other and had to problem solve and reschedule perhaps when there was interruptions in cell service or Wi-Fi. And to me, to this day, that still sticks with me, the feedback that I heard from the students. And in fact, several of the DePaul students got together and they did a video archive of how much they appreciated having this link to their peers when they had a hard time linking to the peers within their own university because we were shut down. And so that's something that still sticks with me today, the impact of virtual exchange during COVID for our students. That was very welcomed by them. All right. Well, I want to thank all of you for your time. I think this is a very interesting panel. It really moves virtual exchange forward in terms of doing research and then supplementing that research in understanding the qualitative aspects of what our outcomes mean. Thank you all. And I really appreciate all of your time and effort on the virtual exchange and today. Thank you.
Thank you so much for
Bye-bye.
having us.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.